welcome to another deep dive into architecture.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a fun one.
We're diving into a debate that's got everybody in architecture talking.
Yeah, even outside the field, I'd say.
Our listener sent us this YouTube video with Patrik Schumacher and Mark Foster Gage going head-to-head.
Oh yeah, it gets really intense.
Just to set the scene, this debate went down at the Texas A&M College of Architecture.
Yeah, they were trying to recreate that feeling.
Like those old-school intellectual showdowns.
Yeah, like Gore Vidal versus William F. Buckley Jr.
But with architects.
Exactly.
Schumacher actually throws out this really provocative idea right from the get-go.
Oh, yeah.
Privatizing public spaces.
Wow, so imagine.
I know, like Central Park with an entrance fee.
Wow.
The whole debate actually starts with Schumacher's take on the housing crisis in London.
Okay.
And he actually argues that there isn't too little capitalism in the housing market, but too much government intervention.
So he's saying that things like...
Yeah, things like zoning laws, building codes, affordable housing programs. He thinks they're actually making the situation worse.
Yeah, that goes against a lot of conventional wisdom about these things, right?
It really does.
Yeah.
Is he basically saying that those regulations...
He thinks they distort the natural forces of supply and demand.
Okay.
And he argues that if we just let the free market run its course, developers would build more housing, prices would come down, and the problem would solve itself.
So what does he propose to actually fix the problem?
Well, he proposes some pretty radical solutions.
Okay.
He says we should abolish all those regulations we just talked about. Zoning laws, building codes, affordable housing mandates.
Yeah.
And he even says we should privatize spaces like parks and plazas.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So a city with almost no rules.
That's a pretty radical vision, right?
It sounds pretty utopian in some ways.
Yeah, but also potentially chaotic.
Yeah, I mean, what's stopping developers from just building skyscrapers everywhere?
Right.
And just pricing out everyone except the super rich.
Yeah, those are valid concerns, and that's exactly what Gage brings up in the debate.
Okay.
He points out that cities like Houston, which have very limited zoning regulations, often end up with these sprawling, car-dependent landscapes that prioritize private property over the public good.
Makes sense.
So Gage is worried that Schumacher's vision could lead to the homogenization of urban spaces, where everything looks the same, and it only caters to the wealthy.
Yeah, and Gage also brings up a good point about monopolies.
Yeah, monopolies are a huge concern.
If you hand over public spaces to private companies, what's stopping them from just jacking up prices?
Exactly.
Or restricting access?
Yeah, we've seen this happen with things like toll roads and privatized parking, haven't we?
All the time.
Yeah, like remember that case in Chicago where they sold their parking meters to a private company?
Yeah, what happened there?
Parking rates went through the roof.
Yeah.
And the city totally lost control over a crucial part of its infrastructure.
So it's like they gave away...
They gave away a valuable asset.
Yeah, and lost control.
And it really raises this important question for us, right?
Yeah.
Where do we draw the line between public and private?
Right.
And what are the consequences of blurring those boundaries?
Especially in the context of a city.
Exactly.
And the debate gets even more heated when they start talking about the 2008 financial crisis.
Oh, yeah. Things really get going there.
So Schumacher, being a staunch free market advocate, blames the government, not deregulation, for the meltdown.
Yeah, well, it all boils down to their very different economic philosophy.
I was just going to say, it seems like their worldviews are like completely opposite.
They are totally opposite.
So break down for me the different philosophies.
Okay, so on the one hand, you have Schumacher, who's a proponent of neoliberalism.
Okay.
This idea that the market will naturally regulate itself. And lead to the best outcomes.
Okay.
And he argues that government programs like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which were designed to encourage homeownership, actually incentivized all these risky lending practices that fueled the housing bubble.
So he's saying that government intervention that was meant to help people.
Yeah, to help people achieve the American dream of owning a home.
Right.
Actually created the system where people were encouraged to take on way more debt than they could handle.
Wow.
And that's what led to the whole crash.
Okay, and what about Gage?
So Gage takes a more Keynesian approach. So he believes that the government has a role to play in regulating the market.
Okay.
To prevent things like recessions.
Yeah.
And protect the public good.
Okay.
And he argues that the deregulation of the financial industry, which allowed banks to engage in all this risky and complex derivatives trading, was actually a major factor in the 2008 crisis.
So for Gage, the government should act as a sort of referee.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Making sure that the financial system doesn't descend into chaos and hurt ordinary people.
Exactly. And it's interesting how this debate about architecture spills over into broader economic and political issues.
Totally.
It shows how interconnected all these fields are.
Absolutely.
I mean, the way we design our cities, the economic systems we live under, our ideas about public and private space. These are all deeply intertwined.
It really makes you think about the bigger picture.
It does.
This is fascinating stuff.
Yeah, and we're just getting started.
I know. I can't wait to hear more.
Me too.
Okay, so from a city with almost no rules, we're now moving into a realm where buildings are more than just concrete and steel.
Yeah, this is where the debate really gets heady. They get into aesthetics.
Ooh.
Both Schumacher and Gage are pushing back against this idea that aesthetics is just about whether a building is pretty or not. They're digging much deeper, exploring how our sense of beauty connects to our values, our culture, even our politics.
So where do they differ on this?
Well, Schumacher has this really interesting theory. He thinks aesthetic values are actually rooted in societal evolution. So he argues that the styles and designs we find beautiful are the ones that best reflect and reinforce the values of our time. And he even uses the term aesthetic revolution. He suggests that as society changes, we need to constantly update our aesthetic sensibilities as well.
So what we find beautiful isn't fixed.
Exactly.
It kind of evolves along with our ideas about the world.
Precisely. And he gives this example of how our appreciation for dense urban living might need to evolve as the traditional suburban ideal becomes less sustainable.
Yeah, I can see that.
Think about how cities like Tokyo or Singapore, with their towering skyscrapers and vibrant street life, are now being seen as models for the future.
Yeah, that makes sense. But wouldn't that mean that our aesthetic values are always playing catch-up to societal changes?
That's a great point.
It seems a little reactive.
It does, and that's something that Gage really picks up on in the debate. He argues that Schumacher's view of aesthetics is still stuck in this 19th century framework. And he brings in some really heavy-hitting philosophers, like Graham Harman and Jacques Rancière, who see aesthetics as this much more active and powerful force. So for them, it's not just about passively reflecting societal values, but about actively shaping how we engage with the world and with each other.
So help me unpack this a little.
Yeah.
How does this all connect to architecture specifically?
So this is where Gage introduces object-oriented ontology, or OOO for short. It's this really mind-bending concept, but basically OOO proposes that objects have their own reality, independent of how we perceive them. So aesthetics in this view becomes the way we encounter and relate to these objects, these other than human entities.
So instead of just judging a building based on whether we find it visually appealing, we should also think about how that building interacts with its surroundings, how it affects the people who use it, and maybe even how it has a kind of agency of its own.
You got it. It's about expanding our understanding of what architecture can be and how it operates in the world.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it.
Yeah.
And you know, it's interesting because you can really tell that this idea of ooh gets under Schumacher's skin.
Yeah, it really does. Gage actually mentions that Schumacher was really dismissive.
Oh, really?
Of this symposium that he organized at Yale. Where they were exploring ooh and other contemporary aesthetic theories.
Wow. So Schumacher just shot it down.
Pretty much, yeah. And Gage says the criticism was so harsh that he took it personally.
Ouch. Yeah, I bet that stings.
Yeah.
You know, this back and forth between Schumacher's more traditional view of aesthetics and Gage's embrace of ooh.
Yeah.
It really reminds me of this tension that we see in other fields too.
Like what?
It's like that classic battle between tradition and innovation.
Yeah.
You know,
I see that.
Like sticking with what we know versus pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
Yeah, that's a great observation. And that tension spills over into the next big question of this debate.
Which is?
Can architecture be a form of activism?
Oh, wow.
Can it actually change the world for the better?
That is a big question. So where do they stand on this one?
Well, Schumacher is quite skeptical. He sees architecture as a discipline that should respond to social and technological advancements, but not necessarily try to initiate them. He worries that architects who get too caught up in activism might lose sight of their core purpose, which is to design beautiful and functional buildings.
So he's saying that architects should just stick to what they do best.
Yeah.
Leave the activism to the politicians.
Kind of, yeah.
And the protesters.
Yeah, but Gage obviously disagrees with this.
Okay.
He argues that aesthetics can be a powerful tool for social engagement.
Okay.
And he points to historical examples like the modernist movement,
okay,
where architects really used clean lines and functional designs and new materials to try to create a utopian vision for a better future.
So for Gage, it's not just about building a pretty building.
No.
It's about building a building that embodies certain values.
Exactly.
That challenges the status quo.
Yeah.
That maybe even inspires people to imagine a different way of living.
Exactly. And Gage brings a really interesting personal perspective to this debate.
How so?
He actually describes himself as a gay kid from Republican Nebraska.
Wow.
Which suggests that he has firsthand experience using aesthetics to challenge societal norms.
Yeah.
And to fight for a more inclusive world.
That's such an important point. For Gage, aesthetics isn't just some abstract concept.
Right.
It's a lived experience.
Exactly.
It's a way of navigating and pushing back against a world that doesn't always accept you for who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And this actually leads to a pretty funny moment in the debate.
Okay. What happened?
So Schumacher kind of implies that Gage hasn't really been an activist. And Gage kind of jokingly fires back and says,
what does he say?
Fuck you. I have fought my share of uphill battles.
Wow, I bet that got the audience going.
I know. I would have loved to be there for that.
Me too. I love how this debate gets...
It gets personal.
And passionate.
It does. You can really tell these guys really care about this stuff.
It's not just like an intellectual exercise.
No, it's about their values, their identities, their visions for what the future of architecture could be.
Right. Okay, so we've talked about their views on aesthetics, activism. Now I'm dying to know about their actual architectural style.
Right. Let's get into the architecture.
So this is where parametricism and triple O come in.
This is where things get really architectural.
Yeah, and that's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive. Okay, so let's dive into the heart of this architectural dual parametricism versus triple O. I'm ready.
This is where we really see their contrasting philosophies take shape in how they approach form technology and the future of design. Schumacher really passionately defends his brainchild parametricism as the next evolution of architecture.
So for those of us who aren't architects, break down parametricism. What does it actually look like?
Imagine buildings that flow and curve almost as if they were sculpted by the wind.
Okay.
Think swirling facades, complex geometries, a sense of dynamism and interconnectedness. That's kind of the visual signature of parametricism.
So it sounds pretty futuristic. Is it all about aesthetics, though, or is there a deeper philosophy behind it?
It's definitely not just about looks. Parametricism is also a methodology, a way of designing using algorithms and data to create these really responsive, adaptable structures.
So you're saying like a building that could actually adjust its shape?
Yeah.
Or function based on the weather?
Exactly.
Like people using it.
Think of it as architecture that can evolve with changing needs and contexts.
That's pretty wild.
It is pretty wild, and Schumacher really believes that advanced digital tools are essential to achieving this level of complexity. He argues that these tools allow architects to go beyond the limitations of traditional design methods and create truly innovative and responsive structures.
But we talked earlier about how Gage criticized Schumacher for being too rigid in his aesthetic views.
Right.
So is there a similar tension here with parametricism and its reliance on rules and algorithms?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's something that Gage definitely picks up on in the debate.
Okay.
He argues that Schumacher's parametricism, while it can be visually stunning, can also be a bit too restrictive.
Okay. How so?
Well, Schumacher lays out these pretty strict rules for parametricism.
Okay, like what?
Like avoid basic geometric shapes like squares and circles, no repetition. Everything has to be curves, gradients, and continuous variation.
So it almost sounds like a paradox.
It does, right?
This movement that's supposed to be about cutting-edge technology and innovation.
Yeah.
But it's also bound by all these strict rules.
That's exactly Gage's point.
Okay.
He says that these rules can actually stifle creativity and lead to a kind of homogenization where everything starts to look the same.
Interesting.
And he even playfully challenges Schumacher.
What does he say?
He says that if parametricism is truly so valuable, then based on Schumacher's own free market logic, shouldn't it be thriving in the marketplace?
I love how Gage just uses Schumacher's own arguments against him.
Me too. It's really clever.
So if Gage doesn't like parametricism, what does he propose as an alternative?
This is where O comes in.
Okay.
Which stands for object-oriented ontology.
Like we touched on that earlier.
Exactly. Remember those philosophers we discussed earlier, like Graham Harman?
Yeah.
O in architecture draws very heavily from their ideas.
Okay.
And it encourages architects to engage with these broader philosophical concepts.
Okay.
And to really rethink the very foundation of the discipline.
So if parametricism is all about these high-tech tools and complex forms,
yeah.
O is more about taking a step back.
Right.
Asking these fundamental questions about what architecture is.
Yeah.
And how it relates to the world around us.
Gage argues that we need to move beyond this narrow focus on aesthetics and functionality and start thinking about architecture in a more holistic way.
And I love how Gage just throws in that Game of Thrones reference.
Oh.
Tells Schumacher, nothing Jon Snow when it comes to O.
It's funny, but it really does underscore that generational divide and the challenge to these established ways of thinking.
Right. I can see why Schumacher might feel a little threatened by all of this.
Oh, totally. It's like Gage is saying, hey, there's this whole other way of thinking about architecture that you haven't even considered.
Exactly. And this kind of tension plays out in their discussion about the role of technology in architecture.
Right.
Schumacher sees digital tools as a way to kind of enhance authorship.
Yeah.
To free architects from these more mundane tasks. So they can focus on these higher level design decisions.
It's like the computer becomes a collaborator in a way. Helping to realize the architect's vision in ways that just wouldn't be possible manually.
So for Schumacher, technology is a way to kind of push the boundaries of creativity.
Yeah.
To make these even more complex and innovative designs a reality.
Exactly. But Gage has a different perspective on this.
Okay. What's his take?
He argues that technology shouldn't just be about making things easier or more efficient. He believes that it should be used to make architecture more noticeable. More thought-provoking.
He uses that analogy of Heidegger's broken tool, right?
Yeah, exactly. Can you remember how that connects to architecture?
So Heidegger argues that we only become truly aware of a tool when it malfunctions, when it breaks down.
Right.
And Gage suggests that architecture can work in a similar way.
Yeah.
It can become more meaningful when it kind of disrupts our expectations. When it doesn't just blend seamlessly into the background.
Exactly. It's like he's saying that sometimes imperfection or a break from the norm can actually make a building more interesting and engaging.
It makes me think of those brutalist buildings from the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
They were often criticized for being really harsh and unforgiving.
Right.
But they definitely made a statement.
They did. They stood out. And that's the kind of architecture that Gage is advocating for. Buildings that challenge us, that make us think differently about the spaces that we inhabit.
I have to say, it's amazing how this debate has touched on so many different ideas.
I know, me too.
From philosophy and economics to technology and the future of cities.
Yeah, and I really loved how the audience got involved.
Yeah, asking those really thought-provoking questions.
Yeah, remember that one person who suggested using parametric modeling to simulate deregulation?
Oh, yeah.
Just to see how Schumacher's ideas would actually play out in a virtual city.
That's such a good idea.
I know, right?
And that question about whether privatizing public spaces would actually lead to the visual chaos that Schumacher himself says he's opposed to.
Talk about turning the tables.
Yeah. So I have to say, after listening to this whole debate,
yeah,
I'm still not sure which side I'm on.
And that's the beauty of it, I think.
Yeah.
Schumacher and Gage have presented these two very different but equally compelling visions for what the future of architecture could look like.
Right. One embraces technology and the free market. The other champions philosophy and a more nuanced understanding of aesthetics.
Exactly. It's like they're holding up a mirror to our own values and asking us to consider what kind of world we want to build.
Right. Do we want cities that are sleek and efficient and driven by market forces?
Yeah.
Or do we want spaces that are more human-centered and thought-provoking?
Yeah.
And maybe even a little bit messy.
Yeah. It's a question that doesn't have any easy answers.
No, it doesn't. And that's what makes this whole deep dive so exciting.
I agree.
And hopefully this has sparked your own curiosity about the future of design.
We really encourage you to explore the work of both of these architects.
Yeah.
Delve into the philosophies that they're discussing, and most importantly, form your own opinions about the kind of world you want to see.
That's exactly. Who knows? Maybe one of our listeners will be inspired to create the next great architectural revolution.
I hope so.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time.
See ya.